Welcome back to the Housing Collective podcast. My name is Tom Neely, founder and director of Neymar Search, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Phil Andrew, Chief Executive of Orbit. So Phil, thanks ever so much for joining us this morning. For the listeners, could you give us a brief introduction to yourself and your organisation?
Yes, so hi, nice to be here. Phil Andrew, I'm Chief Executive of Orbit Group. So we're a not-for-profit organisation. We've got around 47,000 homes around the Midlands, the East and the Southeast of England. We build around 1,000 new homes a year as well, which is very exciting. And we've got around 100,000 customers and a big journey ahead of us as we have a recently launched 2030 strategic plan. I'm supported by 1,400 outstanding colleagues who all jump out of bed every day to make a social difference.
Thank you, Phil. And I'll definitely talk about the new strategy later on in the episode as well. So, but first, your career, Phil. You've had a varied background, to say the least. From your career span from corporate finance, trusted services, right through to the charity sector before housing. So, talk to us about how those varied experiences has shaped your leadership style and also the values, I guess, that you bring to Orbit.
I was in a position as a young person, but a lot of my family needed to be housed in some way or another, and that required me to find the money to get a house for my father, for my mother-in-law and father-in-law, and a variety of other relatives who needed assistance. So really it was my job as a 21-year-old leaving university to get out there and earn as much money as I possibly could. So I spoke to my father, and my father said to me, I've never seen an unemployed accountant go and become an accountant. And having just finished a degree in glaciology and geomorphology, I didn't think that was an obvious arc, but went and did it. And that was that. Trained at IBM, and then went off and became a money market trader, a derivatives trader, and then a bond dealer. Before moving, and that was in Ireland, and then moved back to the UK, and joined Big Bad Tobacco. Now, I'd say BAT probably the best run organisation I've ever worked in, although doing entirely the wrong thing. But it was a wonderful experience. I travelled all over the world. I was a regional treasurer in Asia Pacific, worked in Russia for a couple of years as financial controller, and then just got myself to a point where I thought, well, I do need to get back. And my wife said to me, why are you still doing this? You've got such a strong social conscience at home. Shouldn't you be doing something socially worthwhile? And I met when I was coming back to the UK, because the kids needed to get into kind of schools. We were moving about a lot, and I met a guy called Herb Nahapiat, who was chief executive of an organisation called Calix, which later became Sodexo Justice Services. And he was running PFI prisons in the UK, and I interviewed with him, and he said to me, well, tell me what we do here. And I said, well, you look after around 4,000 prisoners at Her Majesty's pleasure. And he said, we don't do that. We take people at the lowest point of their lives and we rehabilitate them to be useful members of society. And that is what we do. We do not house prisoners. And really, that sent me off on a journey of really understanding that I can be myself at work and be the same person at home and make a difference and get paid. So that allowed me to do that. I became chief exec of Sodexo Justice Services. That's my first CEO role, which honestly I didn't do very well. And I'm now in my fourth role, having worked in Working Links as a welfare to work provider, step change debt charity, chief executive, which was a terrific job. Thoroughly enjoyed that. And now I'm here at Orbit. So, that's a whistle stop tour of my career. And I think I would say that I've made a huge number of mistakes throughout my career. I've I've probably got things right just over half of the time, which is probably why I've survived into decent CEO roles. And yeah, it's been very exciting.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Phil. And what an interesting story, particularly around the whole Sodexo, kind of the justice system as well. So, fascinating viewpoint on that as well. And I guess just touching on your previous role before coming into Orbit, you had 5 years leading Step Change through what can only be described as turbulent times. What motivated you to take on the chief executive role at Orbit and I guess enter the housing sector, which can only be described as quite challenging times at the moment as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question I often ask myself, to be honest. I think for 5 years, 6 years at Step Change were amazing. A fully FCA regulated, consumer duty obligated organisation where I still hold unlimited personal liability for client detriment through my FCA obligations, and will do until I've been out of that role for 5 years. So, an environment that took consumer duty and consumer standards unbelievably seriously, and it was an exciting time. I was at the same time a NED at Raven Housing Trust, an outstanding housing association down in the kind of Reigate, Redhill, Horsham areas. Very well run, very interesting challenges. And when I went to be NED there, I thought, well, that'd be really easy. It's a nice, smallish housing association with seemingly plenty of money. And I spent 5 years basically on I don't understand what's going on apprenticeship there. They were very understanding. We were very, 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 very nice. And having been in Step Change for a number of years, I just thought to myself, what's the next big challenge? I was brought up in some very, very ropey accommodation as a child. I've been in mouldy accommodation above chip shops. I've lived in a house which for many years where it was absolutely jumping with fleas, and where the only heater was a paraffin heater in the hallway. Slept on a floor in my parents' bedroom for over a year because we were out of bedrooms. And it strikes me that if you don't have housing as a foundation stone, and this is something I learned in the offender rehabilitation environment as well, if you don't have decent housing, it's really hard to get on with everything else. So when I was given the opportunity to interview for Orbit, I absolutely jumped at the chance. I thought to myself, this is kind of what my career's been working up to all these years, and 2 years in, I'm very, very pleased to do.
Definitely. And just once again, touching on Step Change, you went through unprecedented change or kind of troubles, I guess. You've navigated the charity through a pandemic, which no one was expecting, and naturally the knock-on effect of that was the cost of living crisis. So you look back at that time of those 5 years with Step Change. What are the biggest lessons you've learned during that period, and how have you been able then to apply them into Orbit?
Yeah, there were probably two big lessons I'd take from that. I'd say that the first one is we were having a massive debate about whether at some point in the future, as an FCA regulated call center, we could have people working from home, and we've been talking about it for years, and it wasn't possible. It was too difficult. We didn't have the kit. People didn't have workspaces in which they could operate at home safely, and we were really worried about the confidentiality of it. When the pandemic broke, we just didn't have a choice. We had to stand up a remote working structure. And so we got hold of 820 laptops, moved people home, told them to do the best that they could, and it actually worked really, really well. The government gave us a bit of money for the tech that we needed, and that was absolutely wonderful. So it's amazing, isn't it? And I don't want to kind of go into kind of wartime rhetoric, but when you've got an emergency on, it's extraordinary what you can achieve that you didn't think was possible previously. You just cut through all that red tape and away you go. And I think that was very, very important. And then you're quite right that the cost of living crisis that came after it was kind of really unprecedented. And I think that taught me a lesson which I think is really important in the housing sector as well. And that's that probably the 6 to 7 million people in the UK who could deal with debt advice and do with debt advice at the moment. And I think we could probably help online about 600,000 people a year. So you can help kind of 10% of the people who ideally would need that help. And you can spend your time weeping and wailing and gnashing your teeth and saying, well, isn't it terrible we can't help as many people as need our help? Or you can just say we're helping as many people as we can and just reconcile yourself to that fact and not spend time beating yourself up about it, because there's very little you can do about it. So, just get on with it.
It's a really good point. And I guess as well, Phil, you mentioned about your childhood and particularly you mentioned in our conversations previously, you're living in emergency council provided housing and later in poor quality accommodation in Stockton-on-Tees, albeit private rented sector rather than social housing. But how has that personal background shaped your outlook and approach as a leader moving into the housing sector?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this comes back, I think, to this whole concept of putting yourself in the shoes of the individuals we're here to serve. Our charitable objects are really clear as a not-for-profit housing association. We're here to help as many people as we can into safe and appropriate, decent accommodation. And I would add to that, but they're proud to live in. And for me, when I go around and speak to customers and visit schemes and individual properties, and I walk up, the first thing I think is, would I be proud to have my friends round as either a child or an adult to this accommodation? And if the answer is no, I wouldn't, then we're probably not doing quite what we need to do. So I think it does allow me to empathize, but also what it's allowed us to do is bring into sharp focus within orbit the concept of aesthetic benchmark, and saying not only are we providing a decent home, but what does it look like what's the curb appeal? What's it look like when you're driving? And we have got such a long way to go on that, given where we are with the state of some of our accommodation.
Yeah, and I guess that moves quite nicely into what I'm really excited to talk to you about is your 2030 strategy that you've just launched. It's very much aimed at improving customer experience and delivering more homes. But can you go into a bit more detail about that, Phil, and outline some of the key priorities in that strategy and what, in your view, and I guess all bit in the board, what does success look like to you by 2030?
Yeah. And the thing about the 2030 strategy is there's nothing particularly groundbreaking about it. There's nothing where you think, well, that's unbelievably clever. There's a lot of getting the basics right here. So we break the 2030 strategy into two sections. The first one is what we call our getting the basics right. And the second one is around doing some, once we've got that right, doing something that allows us to spread that customer excellence to more customers if we can. So we start out where what we do is, if you think about it as a circle, we right at the center of that circle, our aim is to provide amongst the best customer experience of any housing association in the country. Now that's a bit wordy, but we are in a position where our TSMs weren't in a great place, our complaint rates weren't in a great place, call wait times weren't, our fixed first time rates weren't terrific, etc., etc. So a lot of the metrics where we'd say, are we really, really proud of what we do, and are our customers happy with what we do? They weren't there. Now we're seeing green shoots. We're seeing significant improvements in all sorts of things. Call wait time has improved dramatically, and a lot of those kind of leading indicators are looking better. The TSNs will take longer to sort out. But if we're going to get to that point where we go from kind of lower half on our TSMs right up to the top of the pile. There's some basic things that we really have to do, and that comes back to what I was saying about maintaining those good quality, safe and affordable homes that our customers love. Now, this is incredibly important for customers love bit because it brings in a bit around consumer standards whereby we need to adjust our service to allow individuals to experience what we do in their various ways, because people perceive and receive our services in different ways, and we've got to be able to adjust according to that. And it brings in as well the aesthetic benchmark elements as well. Then we say we're going to be delivering at least 1,000 new homes a year, which is great, and that's really important for us. Because we want to help the government with its housing targets, and hopefully we'd like to be able to build more than 1,000 new homes a year, but kind of more on that later perhaps. But also, if we don't invest in new homes, then we're going to have a kind of decaying asset base across the 47,000 homes we currently have. We need to keep topping those up as we go. Then we're doing a full rework of the end-to-end customer journey, and maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. A really big part of this, and going to be the biggest bit of leadership from my perspective, is just hiring the very best people that you can, building that team, and so we're doing a lot of work on that. And then making sure that we have funded a what we call our Better Days program, where we've spent about £3 million a year doing wraparound services on employability and sustainment and that kind of thing, to make sure that that kind of a hole in the social security safety net where the government is not properly funded, that's working all right. So that's kind of the inner circle of get the basics right. And we're going to go back at the end of this year, 2025, to the board and say, have we made enough progress on that? And assuming that we have, then what that allows us to do is kind of really begin to kind of continue the building with the strong relationships with Homes England, get those grant rates up, do a lot more regeneration if we can, look at kind of non-traditional financing structures so we can kind of raise more money without straining the balance sheet. We've got our 2030 EPCC obligations, our 2050 net zero carbon obligations. And then we want to work a lot more in partnership with other housing associations. And if that means kind of mergers with other organisations at some point in the future, that's something we might look at kind of 2026 onwards. And then the final thing is just making sure, looking at our geography, that we're very spread out at the moment, from kind of Midlands all the way through to Ipswich and Lowestoft, all the way down to Margate, Broadstairs, Hastings, Brighton, and just making sure we've got a geographical structure that allows us to serve our customers well at a reasonable price. So, if we just do all that, be in a good place.
Yeah, but it's fair to say you're going to be busy, Phil.
It is busy. It is busy, but it's great busy, and it's good busy, because the one thing I've say about the organisation is it's been very, very carefully and well financially managed. I've got a fantastic CFO in Jonathan Waldbank, who's looked after the organisation's finances for a number of years now. And so, whilst we don't have enough money to do everything we want to do, nobody ever has enough money to do what we want to do. We are in a position where we're probably better placed than others are, and I think that's a good place to be.
Yeah, of course. And I guess a lot of these questions that I've got now, Phil, in a way is hypothetical, because you've only just launched the strategy. But one thing that I did read in the strategy is that you want to view everything through the lens of your residents. And as you rightfully say there at the beginning, that you want to put customers at the heart of all of its decisions. But what changes are underway to transform the customer experience, and how will, more importantly, I guess, how will residents tangibly notice the difference in their day-to-day interactions with Orbit?
Yeah, and this goes to the very heart of everything we're doing. So within the 2030 strategy, we've got a sub-segment of the strategy which is called our Everyday Excellence Programme. And the Everyday Excellence Programme is looking at our end-to-end customer journey. So right from the moment somebody has some form of challenge, all the way through to resolution, and also a wraparound with that in terms of how the individual's home feels, and how living in it as a customer of Orbit feels. And I think it's fair to say that we looked at the end-to-end customer journey, and it was very, very telephony based. 83% of our customers come to us by phone still. Well, one thing I can absolutely guarantee you is that 83% of our customers do not want to come to us by phone. And weirdly, at Step Change, when we started the transformation program there, we had 83% of people came to us by phone, and 5 years later, 18% of people came to us by phone. And so because people just, if you do a demographic split, older people might want to come to us by phone. Younger people really don't. I mean, if you look at my kids, they won't even order a Chinese by phone. They just don't want to do it. So, and the consumer standards obligate us to create an omni-channel structure whereby we can work with people in the way they want to be communicated, and therefore, if people want to see us on site, they'll be able to see us on site. If people want to phone us, they'll still be able to phone us. If people want to come through the app, they'll be able to do that. And if people just want to do it in another online way or through live chat or whatever, of course they'll be able to do that. So we looked at that, and we thought, well, we can probably change 46, 48, maybe 50 different major bits to make that work much better. Actually, what we decided to do was bin off the whole process and start again. So not start with tweaking a telephony base, we just start from scratch again. And that meant, from our perspective, we have to hire the right people. We have to train them. We've got to get the culture right. We've got to rewrite all the processes, and then we put the system in. We've chosen Dynamics 365 Microsoft to help us with that journey. Put best part of £35 million in as well as an investment pot for that. And what that will ensure is that customers can come to us as they want, as I've said, but really importantly, we've got our journey at the moment runs through quite legacy systems, and what we can see and what our subcontractors can see is quite different. So what we're going to do is create a seamless structure whereby our contractors use exactly the same systems as us, so we can see where they are in real time, they can see where we are in real time. This has been a lot of problems so far. So we're looking forward to that, but that's not going to take 5 minutes to do. That's going to take a couple of years to get sorted, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Definitely. And I guess that you've hit the nail on its head there, Phil, is that such a transformation, as you know, when you've been through many, does take time, and also requires engaged colleagues and making sure that you get that culture right. So talk to us about how you're taking those, as you mentioned at the beginning, those 1,400 colleagues along that journey to becoming a more customer-first culture, and what are you doing to equip and motivate your team to deliver service improvements that you envision?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, the thing I'd say is it's not my strategy or the board's strategy. It's our colleagues' strategy. We went out on a series of roadshows right at the beginning of my tenure, back in 2023, and we said, well, what do you want us to do? What do you want this organization to look like? What is stopping you getting to where you need to get to? And what they said really was, well, sometimes you don't trust us, you don't empower us, you don't give us enough budget. It's too hierarchical. If I want to change a carpet in the hallway, I've got to ask 3 different people, and then it gets lost in a hole, and then it doesn't get done. So empower us to be able to make changes. Give us a little bit of budget, and their viewpoint was put customers at the heart of everything we do. So we then went back with a draft strategy and said, well, this is what we think we heard. What do you reckon? And they made some tweaks. And then we took their strategy to our board and they approved it. So anyone who was there during that process, you can if you've got any concerns about the strategy, well, it was a consensus of of the organisation, right from frontline up to board. So that's been very, very helpful in allowing us to be very clear on where we're going. And in terms of our people there with it, well, I don't think they ever weren't there. I think probably we'd just probably lost it a little bit at probably senior leadership level, whereby I think at times we had somewhat seen the asset as the customer, and we'd thought, well, if we just create a consistently half decent asset, then everybody will probably be fine with that. And actually, with the consumer standard obligations, that's not enough, is it? You've got to adjust your service based on individual customers' requirements and circumstances, and reasonable adjustments at times are required. And so, I think the timing just worked really nicely, but largely our colleagues were already there.
Yeah, of course. And I guess thinking more broadly, Phil, from a sector perspective now, the social housing sector is undergoing a big regulatory shift with consumer regulations being strengthened. How is Orbit geared up for the new consumer regulations and standards, particularly with greater scrutiny on tenant services and safety? But also with that, is a secondary point. I'm keen to get your views on this because you mentioned there the FCA regulation with step change. How have you personally found that moving into Orbit 2 years ago?
Yeah, and I think it was very fortuitous that we were just doing a strategic repivot when the new consumer standard obligations came in. So I think we've been able to add that in quite seamlessly. The industry baffles me to an extent. The fact that we've got an ombudsman who has woken up and is quite vociferous, and we've been on the receiving end of a number of severe maladministrations, and we apologise to our customers for those failings, but we accept them because they're right. And I know the industry generally has been negative at times around the fact that the ombudsman is as lively as he is. I have no issue with it whatsoever. If you want a lively ombudsman, go to the Financial Ombudsman Service, and then you'll find out what a lively ombudsman is. So I think it's probably just that it probably wasn't happening before. It's been something of a shock to the system. And in terms of the regulator, obviously previously had a strong governance obligation, had a strong financial viability obligation. The fact that there's now a consumer standard C rating, I think is fantastic because it means that it really helps housing association chief executives to drive the right behaviours. Because it was too easy previously to get a G1, V1 and not be doing the right thing for customers. You can't do that anymore because you're not going to get a G1 if you've got a C3. And so that's very, very clear, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. So I think the industry is all the better for it.
Orbit recently, to a certain extent, recently faced an independent review from the Ombudsman, particularly around its handling around damp and mould issues. So you talk about learning, fix it, get on with it. I guess, what did you learn from that experience, and what actions did you take to make sure that that's been resolved and doesn't happen again?
Yeah, and whilst the independent review was a little bit painful, we welcomed that because the points it made were right. Our backlog on damp, mould, and condensation was too high. We weren't acting quickly enough, and therefore we made the necessary changes. And I think one of the challenges that Orbit has more generally is we're very, very outsourced. We outsource the vast majority of our repairs maintenance. And one of the things it did teach us is to really get hold of your subcontractors who are doing that work, and have a system where you can absolutely see whether they've done it, whether it's fixed. Because damp, mould, and condensation is a tricky thing because it's unlikely that you fix it forever the first time you go. You don't need a multi-stage approach depending on the severity of it, and you probably need to keep on top of it to make sure that it's going to be all right. And so, for us, it was very, very clearly a matter of we accept the recommendations, we make the necessary process changes, and we make sure our subcontractors do what they're promising to do, and then it's okay.
And just as a sector wide, you mentioned around the sector wide issues, I guess, Phil. Restoring trust naturally with residents is a big theme across the UK. So, from your perspective, are there any sector wide changes or collaborations you believe that are really needed so that housing associations can improve customer service and also accountability collectively across the sector?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I think the sector does collaborate. I think, to be fair, the National Housing Federation do a good job of pulling everybody together. And from a building perspective as well, a new homes perspective, there's a fair bit of collaboration and cross-working. I think at times there can still be slightly pointy elbows, though, in terms of working together because it's because the organisations generally are under pressure from the regulator, from the ombudsman, etc. There's always a bit of competitive tension, but I think as I get more experienced in the sector, certainly collaboration is something I'd like to do a lot more. And if I think over the last couple of weeks, we've had quite big and in-depth meetings on technology sharing, etc., with other large housing associations. And I think we just need to continue doing that. I mean, the conversation we had with one of the housing associations last week is that, if you just built a D365 asset module, why are we building one? It doesn't make any sense at all. And obviously that's a very, very simplistic thing to say. But I think there's more collaboration in that respect. I mean, if you've got that standardization, you can just spend a lot more time looking after your customers.
Do you think there's a worry there, Phil, from a collaboration perspective, that particularly with smaller organisations, that all of a sudden there's a domino effect in regards to partnership working? Then there's a merger. Then you're handing over your China. Do you think there's that's where there probably isn't as much collaboration as there could be?
Yeah, that could be one of the challenges. I mean, you've always got this spectre of rescue mergers, haven't you, with the regulator having a quiet chat with you to see if you want to rescue X, Y, or Z. And there is consolidation in the industry. I think it's probably important that not to fight that, really. These things will just happen because, I think if you're in a situation where you're a 5, 6, 7,000 home housing association, you're probably kind of exactly the wrong size because you've got all of this regulation, you've still got big financing requirements, you've probably got a credit rating, yet you're trying to spread that overhead across 6 or 7,000 homes. So I'll give you our 14 to 20,000 customers. And sometimes that just really doesn't work. So, some organisations can make it work and some organisations can't.
And from Orbit's perspective, Phil, I'm really intrigued to ask you this question because there are sector challenges. People's financial restraints are really being pushed to the limit at the moment. Yet, with your 2030 strategy, you plan to build around 5,700 homes as part of your growth strategy. So what do you see as some of the main opportunities to expand and invest in new housing? But I guess, given everything that I've just said and that backdrop of all the financial pressures, what obstacles do you see that you might need to overcome over the next 5 years?
It'd be really easy for us to say as Orbit, well, I'll tell you what, we've got so much to do to get our house in order, we're not going to build any new homes. But it's a big decision, because our charitable objects kind of obligate us to create decent homes, and therefore if you're not building or at least collaborating to build, then I think, as I said earlier on, you've got a kind of decaying asset base, and I think that's something the whole sector needs to be quite concerned about. I think the opportunities there are we've now at least got a government that cares about housing. I don't think we've got a very clear way of funding it yet, but we'll see from a comprehensive spending review where we get to with that. But they've released some big lumps of money. It's interesting. I was talking to one of my previous colleagues in Welfare to Work, and obviously they're quite concerned about that environment at the moment. There's no extra money for that within debt advice, where people are really, really struggling. There's no extra money for that. And so we kind of take for granted, oh, well, there's another £2 billion has been released for Homes England to do new home builds. And I think we grab hold of that when we can and be very, very grateful for it. And if you add on to that, but the loosening to an extent of planning regulation and a uh, and a kind of change in attitude towards yes, we need to put the needs of the nation before the needs of the fact that I like looking at a field out the back of my house. Then I think that's great, and that gives us huge opportunities. I think the area where we've got as an industry the biggest challenge is around regeneration, because there isn't all the funding from Homes England at the moment is for additionality, building new homes, and therefore it's best it's easiest to build greenfield, brownfield, greyfield sites, and actually what we need to do as an industry, if you looked at it in reality, probably by 2060, 20 to 25% of the property that housing associations in the UK look after will need knocking down. And if you're not starting that now, you're leaving something of a legacy, aren't you, for future chief executives of housing associations? And I worry about that. And one of the big areas of policy push, if you like, from Orbit going forward is going to be, how do we properly fund all of this regeneration work that needs doing? But as Homes England have said in the past in open forum, it's not a particularly compelling business case to go to government and say, can we have £5 billion, please, to knock down 100,000 homes and build 100,000 homes? It doesn't go well, because who does it help? It helps existing customers, and then it's very, very difficult because when we're doing the regen work, it needs doing, and our customers say, when are you going to knock our place down and rebuild it? And then when you go, well, next year, they go, well, I can't believe you're going to knock my house down. What am I going to do for the next 2 to 3 years? Which is an entirely appropriate response. But you can't knock a house down. You can't knock an 18-meter block of flats down without 100 odd people moving out for 2 or 3 years. That's really tricky when you've got kids in school and you've got quite a lot of adjustments have been made to homes so that people can live in them, etc. So it's a really thorny issue, but we're going to have to get hold of it, because particularly your 1950s, 1960s, and some of your 1990s properties, so kind of the 3 decades where stuff wasn't built particularly well. That stuff is that stuff's going to have to come down at some point, and someone's going to have to pay for it.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And I've really enjoyed this conversation, Phil. I guess the last question before I do get onto our quick fire questions, so no pressure. This is your first role in social housing after quite a unique career route to get to where you are today. Yeah, from your perspective, what surprised you the most about leading a housing association, and what qualities do you think are most important for leadership right now in the sector?
So I think the thing that surprised me the most has been how down the industry has seemed, how weary the industry has seemed, and how it seems to have been so surprised and slightly negative around incremental regulation around consumers. So I guess they're the things that have surprised me. I think in terms of the leadership requirement, it's very, very straightforward. Just putting the customer at the heart of everything we do, putting yourself in their shoes, and just being really authentic with both colleagues and our customers, and saying, this is what works well, this is what doesn't work well for us at the moment, this is where we messed up, this is what we're doing about it, and having that consumer structure where, when you get trained as a customer service advisor, it's really straightforward, isn't it? So, you go, I'm listening to your problem. I'm sorry that this has happened to you. This is what we're going to do about it, and this is when we're going to have done it by. And if you just run on that basis of authenticity, whilst it doesn't always go well, I think you can be in a reasonably good place.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And thank you, Phil. And I guess quick fire questions just to finish the conversation. What's the most valuable leadership lesson you've learned?
It's build your immediate team around you, and don't try to do their jobs, because if you're doing their jobs, who's doing yours? So what I've done in the past is just to try to build as great a team as I can, and try to find within that team, if I can, a potential successor. And because if you can create an internal successor for a role, then you've got something right. So it's team.
And I guess you mentioned this just in the last question, but what advice would you give to an aspiring housing leader?
Probably be a chief exec somewhere else first. It's a very, very complicated environment, and what I think works well, and I've seen this in a couple of environments, is, as an aspiring housing leader, be prepared to boomerang around organizations. So if you're on the board, if you're on the executive team of a housing association, you want to be chief executive. Maybe go and be chief executive of a small housing association first, and then come back to the organisation you were at before, because it's quite hard to go from being on the exec to being chief exec in a housing association. I think because it is quite a big jump. So just have that flexibility.
Yeah, that's a brilliant response. Thanks, Phil. And I guess, what do you believe to be the key leadership qualities required in today's world?
I think it's all about empathy and authenticity now. Being able to stand up in front of your customers, get out there, don't hide in your office, get out there, take it on the chin, manage your own inbox. When, as a housing association chief executive, you get a lot of complaints directly into your inbox. Read them. And you can't fix them all yourself, but you should at least be reading them. And passing them on and getting them done. And that allows you to understand what's happening, where there's themes, etc. And when things don't go well, just fess up to it.
Brilliant. And final question, Phil, one leadership book you recommend to the listeners?
My recommendation was, don't rely on one leadership book.
Okay.
Because they've all got a specific kind of aim in mind. I've been a big fan over the years of going on strategic leadership development programs at various universities, and going and spending 4 or 5 days at wherever it happens to be, Henley or wherever, getting the latest on a range of strategic ideas and thoughts, and spending time talking to people. I think it's massively more valuable than reading a book.
Phil, thank you so much for joining us on the Housing Collective podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.